being on the same page. It's good to have some terms clarified. So for the purposes of this project and generally, when we talk about salvage material, we are talking about deliberate reclamation of reusable building materials. They can come from constructed works and processes of construction and their waste streams. Often there can be some different ideas about reuse. So again, for the purposes of this project, reuse is previously used. So a lot of reuse happens, quote unquote, through surplus materials, canceled orders. This is not within the scope of our work. And often salvaged lumber from urban trees is called salvage. However, that is actually new lumber. So for our purposes, these are existing used materials coming from a first life and going to a second life. Next, please. Our project is for over 5 years, so we have plenty of time to work on a lot of the methodological and difficult, potentially decision-making issues that we have, although we have a good start on it. Underpinning all of this is building the build reuse capacity to serve the industry going forward. So after the end of the grant, we have capacity to provide environmental product declarations to the reuse industry, and I'll talk more about that. The other three main parts, or the actual main three parts, are the tasks to create a product category rule for reclaimed building products, to develop nationally EPDs for reuse firms and NGOs around the US, and to create a digital EPD generator, and I'll again talk more about that. And you can see over the years, we're trying to work in enough time to really be thoughtful about these processes and make sure there's good involvement, inputs, we work out the bugs and so on, and really take advantage of this opportunity to make this all well-grounded and well-founded for future success. Next, please. I want to really highlight this industry. To this date, been able to track about 1,868 establishments. This is not including creative reuse, so-called, say, art supplies and elements like that, or household goods or antique goods. This is actual building material reuse. It does not mean that one of these entities may not cover or carry some of these other products, however, that their primary focus is on building materials. We're currently estimating about 20,000 jobs, 2.6 billion in annual revenues, and this is all generating $1 billion in wages. This is only 1.3 million tons of materials that are being diverted, which is only or less than 1% of the demolition debris generated in the United States annually. So I hope you can imagine, there's a lot of room to grow. The type 2 economic impact, so this means the actual full impacts throughout communities, including the direct spend, the indirect spend, and the induced spending, is roughly at least 3.5 times. So annual revenues, almost $10 billion, $3.5 billion in local wages. So the real fundamental goal of this program is to grow these numbers. Next, please. Reuse establishments are in every state in the United States. Of course, they might tend or trend towards certain areas. There's a lot of interlocking factors that contribute to the success of deconstruction and reuse in the market. These can include policies and tipping fees and cost of labor, the availability of land. These are all important factors. And so for our project, we are looking at where reuse is happening and to be fundamentally representative of the regionality of reuse establishments. So you can see the West Coast, it's kind of an obvious target. The Great Lakes, and there's a lot of that because of the historic nature of the US, the Southeast, Texas and Colorado, or you can at least see for the moment where a lot of reuse is happening. Next, please. Historically, the industry has been for-profit and nonprofit, almost 50-50, and that's really been, I would say, the grace of the industry is that it really cares. At the same time, the nonprofit sector is not known for being well-funded and supported, and it provides a lot to society without potentially being recognized and understood. I've actually seen now that the for-profit sector is increasing in the industry. About 70% of all these entities deal in mixed materials, so the focus of our EPDs are proportionate to these sort of material-specific divides around, say, mixed material facilities that might carry a variety of materials. About 25% of the industry is focused exclusively on reclaimed lumber, about 3% on reclaimed brick. And then you can see these smaller numbers, 1% in different sectors that are very, very niche. So for example, steel, there is a niche industry of reuse of steel. It's just not a large proportion of the industry. And to meet the goals of our project, we want to at least capture these appropriate material types. Next, please. So for those familiar, and I'm sorry to belabor those, but for the others who are not as familiar, the bottom line of creating environmental product declaration and the underpinnings of this work is life cycle analysis. And that is, as described here, to evaluate environmental burdens associated with products. And these can be goods and services. So you could actually do a life cycle analysis of sending an email of all things or a letter if your goal is to transmit information. But we're more commonly focused on the production of goods. And we are identifying and quantifying the inputs to these processes and the emissions that are released to the environment, and then characterizing the impacts of these processes in order to understand these burdens. And really importantly, this is extremely valuable for transparency, for decision-making, and for being able to evaluate opportunities to make improvements. Next, please. Next, please. Yep, sorry. So the way this is laid out in the life cycle product or building in this case is the stages of life, if we can use that term. So in the production stage, this is module A. The construction or installation stage is the latter part of module A, A4 and A5. The use phase, which is module B, so-called end of life, and we in the reuse industry hate that word because this is not about end of life, this is extension of life. There's not an end of life for reuse. That's module C. And then module D is describing the potential burdens and benefits beyond that product life cycle into the next product life cycle. There are variations in life cycle assessment based on these modules, and the minimum core is modules A1 through 3. And part of that reason, or a large part of that, is the most under the control of the manufacturer or the producer. So they have the ability to really be most certain about what they're characterizing. Imagining as you go on further into construction and use, capturing and being able to control or understand that data gets more difficult, but there is a broad movement in the industry to expand beyond modules A1 through 3. Next, please. So what is an environmental product declaration? It is not a thing unto itself. It is a summary of a life cycle assessment. It's a way to make the life cycle assessment understandable, communicable, and able to be understood eventually, and in some cases, comparable between them. A life cycle analysis has a lot of detail. The idea of the environmental product declaration is to really parse that down into essential parameters that are standardized, and then also that this process is verified by a third party. Next, please. And so what makes this different than maybe some other kinds of declarations that you might be familiar with is it's third-party verified, it's based on an LCA, it's based on standards and guidance, it's quantified, so it's not, for example, like a type 2 environmental declaration, which can actually be self-declared, so that's the first big difference. Can also be single attribute instead of multi-attribute. And it can be a claim, which as a claim or a labeling is not exactly or even at all clarifying the true impacts. It is simply a claim about some parameter attribute of, so for example, this is recycled content, which is great, and we want to know that. It doesn't necessarily tell you the end results of that. And then type 1 eco-labels, which have some similarities. They may be multi-criteria. They have third-party verification. They are more of a pass-fail. So you either have that label or declaration or you don't. And so, for example, it would be Forest Stewardship Council lumber. So they're going to use a basis of criteria, and it may be a mixture of different attributes. It's not necessarily always the same kind of quantification. There are social attributes, for example, to afford stewardship certification. Next, please. And people really like to use this nutrition facts label analogy, so I'm going to use it here. So what does the nutrition facts label do for you? Well, it doesn't actually tell you what you should eat. Somebody else, your doctor, or your spouse or partner can tell you that. It's really about transparency and communicating the information about what's in the food product. A really nice similarity is, though, we're using serving sizes and we're using calories in this case. So when we know a kind of normalized amount, a serving size of this particular type of food, and we know the overall amount of calories in that, and then we're breaking out these different standardized attributes of fat, sodium, carbohydrate, and so on. For an environmental product declaration, it is similar in that way. So what is the serving size? And that's what you're using in a building. The inventory is how much material it's actually taking to make that serving size, say a square foot of something. And then the standardized environmental impacts, which are consistent for EPDs globally. Next, please. Why do we care? And I have a couple of slides just to reinforce this. We believe that increasing EPDs generally, and specifically for salvage and reuse construction products, will increase the market for salvage and reuse construction materials because EPDs are the language. They are currently the real way that we're trying to grapple with at least the environmental side of building products. They're used in building rating systems. They're used in addendums to building codes or green building codes. Local governments and state governments are using EPDs for their purchasing and procurement policies, either simply the presence of an EPD and using EPDs to set thresholds or averages, baselines, for different types of materials. And when they're looking for a global warming potential reduction over a baseline, they have some means for doing that. The current state of saying reuse is good and it intuitively has a lower impact is true. It's not quantified and it's not easy or even at all possible to make direct comparisons to new products. It's also the way that we do whole building life cycle assessment. So a building is a collection of materials. And so if we want to do a whole building life cycle assessment, we need to collect those different impacts together. And the systems, particularly digital and software tools that are used for that, need those databases and the actual data in order to be able to, quote, count that in the whole building life cycle assessment. I think, again, back to the beginning of defining life cycle assessment, even if you're not selling anything, an LCA study can be used to understand the internal processes of a operation or production, to just know what you're spending money on, where you're spending energy, water, and producing waste, and help you develop products and to enhance efficiency of your what you want to achieve, whatever it is you're trying to produce. Next, please. And this is from Jane Anderson in the UK. It's the best source I found of somebody trying to really track the trends of EPD production over the last, in this case, 13, 14 years. You can see that maybe up to about maybe 2020. I mean, the line is pretty steady, but it's a kind of a low slope. But after 2020, it's actually turned into a kind of exponential curve. And her best guess currently, or this was last year, around 120,000 EPDs globally. I'm sure she's undercounting because she probably got exhausted trying to figure out how many there are. But this tells you this is a train that's on the track, and it's actually starting from zero not that long ago. It's picking up speed. Next, please. There are EPDs in Europe for reclaimed products, so I spent a lot of time looking for them. There's not a lot, but at least to convey to you, there are precedents for EPDs for reclaimed building materials. They are not in the United States, so that's what we're trying to do, is make this happen in the US. Next, please. And there's a lot of standards and guidance, so I'm just highlighting here the growth of the capacity of guidance and standards in the United States, because Europe been doing this for a while. So we have the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment. We have ANSI standards, which have been around. We've had EPA, which has most recently produced a lot of guidance. We have product category rules of individual program operators. And so we are joining this chorus, and we're trying to make the voice loud in the United States. Next, please. LCAs and EPDs thus far really have been primarily for new products and understanding recycled content as an input to new products. What we're talking about is actually very different in its way. We're not producing new products, and it's not even recycled content. It is taking an existing product and continuing its life. So our intentions and the way we've designed this project are to develop a new core or Part A PCR for salvaged and reused products for use by the industry. And this is another 3 hours of discussion and more to talk about that. But however, using that, we can start creating EPDs in a certain way, which is called declared units for salvaged and reused products. To go further into what are called functional units, we are going to have to create what are called complementary or Part B PCRs. The core PCR that we're going to create can work with Part B PCRs of existing new products or the existing PCRs for new products in the equivalent categories. So we have a way to work with the existing Part B PCRs and work within the systems of new products. And we can develop additional Part B specifically if it turns out to be the case for salvage reuse product categories. Next, please. And the real meat of this, about a third of our project is data. And in a life cycle model diagram, this is the classic diagram of a life cycle analysis. This is called the inventory analysis. And this is where we are actually quantifying the inputs and outputs of a process. And so what we're going to do is subsidize and provide technical services to facilities throughout the United States to generate their life cycle inventory data that we can then use to create LCAs and EPDs for the industry. And again, build this up over time. We have a 5-year program to do this and beyond the grant program. Next, please. This is my favorite diagram. It's not quite this simple, but it's almost close. A unit process to create something, which, and most products are a collection of unit processes. It's almost as simple. You are taking the inputs and you are quantifying the outputs. And I think it's useful to even think of this in terms of expenses and revenue. So it's expenses to the environment and it's your actual expenses. The revenue, quote unquote, are the things you're producing and the things you're getting value from. And I hope generally people would say, sure, you know what? We should minimize our expenses and maximize our revenues of any type. But this really kind of describes the inventory process and the real meat of doing a life cycle analysis. Next, please. For the salvage industry, there's obviously many ways to obtain materials. So I'm just trying to show simply salvage, deconstruction, and so on are one means to obtain reclaimed material. So there are inputs of energy, materials, water, production of waste, and doing that. That is the equivalent of an A1 for a new product. You might then transport that reuse. You might do some processing on that site. You might transport that reuse product to the reuse facility. You're going to do additional processing. Those are modules A2 and A3 in a life cycle system. Next, please. If it's the case that the products come from other sources, or in fact, we find out that the deconstruction may be a small impact relative to other impacts like transportation, then I'm sort of cutting off that first part and showing that if it was the case that simply materials are transported, and so the cutoff is that point of origin, they go to a reuse facility, we will again have energy, materials, water, production of waste. You can have byproducts that are recycled if that's the case. And so this is A3, the same A3, but given different sources of materials. Transport, that's the A4, so to a site of use or installation. And A5, which would actually be that construction phase. And again, this is a product, it's a continuance of a product, and it also then has the second life cycle. So module C, which is the end of life, quote unquote, process. Next, please. About a third of our effort is on a digital EPD generator. And I just want to say that basically, as everything has evolved from paper to AI, we can take a very long leap there. We absolutely want to and need to be in line with these advances. So EPDs in beginning would be a paper document, a PDF. There's very little readability. There's very little interoperability in those, but now we have digital EPDs, and that's what's needed. So if they're going to interact with digital drawing tools, digital software modeling tools, the ability to make changes, all of this is absolutely essential. And so we have all intention to maintain and be in line with the advances that are happening throughout the industry. Next, please. And this is just a screenshot from EC3 of a digital EPD. And what's really important to note here, and so you don't need to read it, but you can see there are cells, and every cell is a piece of information that can be linked. And I'll leave it at that. Next, please. So the last thing I'm just going to wrap up with is we do know something about the use of reclaimed material and where EPDs might be most beneficial. But it's important to be open to the markets and the opportunities. So a few data points are from old historic lead projects. Wood has been well used in commercial applications. And then you can see finishes and openings as three product categories that have some utility potentially. Next, please. Literally 30 years ago, Portland Metro, the regional government, did a whole feasibility of commercial material reuse study. And so, for example, on the flip side, 10 most commonly salvaged commercial products. Wood stands out again. There's a little bit of different order where you can see specialties is a little lower on the list, but doors, windows, storefront, masonry, cabinetry, electrical. And the good news for us is these align pretty well to what the existing industry is actually reclaiming and making available. Next, please. And I have to mention we do 5, which I believe is currently being balloted for approval. So in the salvage material or reuse material credit, there are targeted so-called product categories. So these are categories that are given a larger weight. And so thinking about alignment and being as sensitive to where we're going to actually serve the market and serve the reuse market, the reuse industry, and being able to provide those materials to the market for the benefits you may achieve. So whether you're a green consumer, a lead project, a government entity, we want to serve all of those. Next, please. And this is it. There's my email. There's the general email, as Melissa mentioned. And I have a few leading questions here to let you know we are doing PCR development. We are actively seeking facilities for facility-specific EPDs, and always love to hear what people think where an EPD could have the most benefit in terms of salvage and reuse product categories. So I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Great. That's a lot of information crammed into a small amount of time. And I think that this is a great foundational opportunity for folks to learn. And people might want to watch this presentation again. I know that I will, and this is my second time seeing it, but I learned something new each time. So Brad just put out a call for people that are in the reuse material world in that industry. If you would like to participate, you can reach out to Brad, and I'll show his email address again, and can put that into chat as well. Brad, I'll let you do that, seeing I'm still sharing the slide. So we did get a few questions in chat, and let's see here. First one was about virtual conference attendee, and I answered that directly in chat. So we'll go to the next one, and that is From Ellie in Minnesota, I love how the EPD looks like the nutritional facts on food. Would this also list the materials used to make that product?
Yeah, so for any EPD, that is a that is owned by the actual company, the producer, quote unquote. And I really hate using that word, but that is the word, producer. I wish I knew I had a better word for its users. However, yes, any product that you make an EPD for, right up front, you are listing the actual components, the material. Um, the second part of effects label at the very bottom where it says, this has had some kind of had this percentage of salt or this. I'm thinking of peanut butter for some reason. It has peanuts, it has salt, it has oil. Yes, they will all list the peanut, salt, and oil.
There was a comment from Mike Johnson that maybe already in existence that material ingredient disclosures will do that for you. HPDs or declare labels are public disclosures of product ingredients. What does the H stand for in this case, Brad or Mike?
It's a health product declaration.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of acronyms being utilized and
Yes.
for good reasons, of course. Okay, and then there was a question answer or a response from folks in England saying that they have materials that they do have EPDs on for reused right now. So that's great. So some examples include steel, oil, gas pipelines, and so on. And a comment was made. The next question is EPDs are best suited for standardized manufactured products where data can be aggregated because variability is low. Reclaimed materials are obviously much less consistent in the time, costs, and impact of reusing. Will specifiers be able to trust reuse EPDs?
Yes, they will, because, well, let me just start with some industries have started with average or industry-wide EPDs. Um, Similar to that idea that within a geographic region and based on the same product categories, you can actually, or it's possible that the highs and the lows won't be so high, so different. And so people are willing to sort of join together and say it's fine for us to have an average of actually more than one producer and more than one facility. This is a radical, I would say, a 360 degree. So, in fact, all the EPDs we're working on are facility specific. Um, so that's my first answer. Per the necessities, we need to do third-party reviews of all the LCAs of each of those facilities. And as much as you can trust any EPD, because we have to meet international standards, then you will be able to trust these EPDs.
There was a comment from Lauren Zimmerman that she finds aggregated data across facilities is harder to trust since inputs can vary so much. So,
And
and
I
I
think,
think with EPDs being created for new construction materials, which is part of the bigger function here, that being able to compare similar materials to those used, or excuse me, to those new materials will help with that sort of one-to-one comparison, if I'm understanding that correctly.
yeah, I think Lauren's agreeing with me.
Yes.
If the variability is high, averaging and aggregation has a wider range. Um, it is important always to have transparency. So again, the fundamentals are location is must be transmitted, and that can relate to a lot of things. So there's also, I won't say an art to reading an EPD, but it is not exactly for your average person going to the supermarket. So they are meant to be a business to business or professional communication. where you are actually, I'm looking at some things here to make sure of the comparability. Um, and so Olivia's question, yes. And so I spent a lot of time not only looking at the lead credits, for example, because that was lead CI commercial interiors that I showed the slide for. And if you saw the lead V5, you can see a focus on interior finishes. And there is some data on where EPDs are, or which EPD types are being used most to get credits, for example, in lead. And in fact, yeah, a lot of those are interiors. Concrete is one where that's just across the board. EPDs are plentiful, they're being used a lot. And the buy clean policies often start with concrete for good reason, because concrete, there's a lot of it used and it has a lot of impacts. Um, I would love to be doing some precast structural or non-structural reused concrete products. If anybody's dealing in those, there is an effort in Europe called the Recreate project to develop LCA and EPDs of reused structural precast concrete panels. But we're not so much doing that now in the US. Our
Next
EPD,
question, are EPDs too high a bar to set for reclaimed materials? There are EPDs for reclaimed steel, as indicated from others, because we have large stock holdings, so data can be aggregated. For newer and emerging reuse opportunities, could a requirement for EPDs act as a blocker to adoption?
it's a chicken and egg, right? Because,
Mhm.
um, and a little history, I was on the lead Material and Resource Technical Advisory Group for LEED before when the EPDs were first introduced into the LEED system. And we spent an awful lot of time talking about the lack of data and the lack of sufficient numbers of EPDs in the market for U.S. Green Building Council to, even though it was still it's an optional credit, to even start asking. So things have to come along together. And the idea that we have a grant and a 5-year program, I mean, the sort of purpose of that is the industry is not on its own. We are subsidizing this effort. So the answer is it is a block because there aren't any and there's no one supporting it, and it's cost a lot of money to get one until it doesn't, because we can get them going and create systems like a digital process. So
That's
we have
yeah,
to take it as it
that's a
comes.
really good point that this is kind of the first rendition of this. So by us tackling this for the very first time, we're starting hopefully a good foundation of more refinement, more comparisons, things like that over time.
Yes.
The next question, I'm going to summarize it because I think I understand it. How do we evaluate concerns of EPDs or reuse of construction materials if some of those materials don't have a EPD?
Well, so that's an existing problem, irregardless,
True.
as noted. So obviously lead, asbestos have been historically large concerns for any legacy materials until those were outlawed. So 78 and 81 are the years when that was outlawed in the US.
Yeah.
So a large presence of lead, for example, I'll pick on lead, um, that in fact has always required testing and it will still continue to require that. If you mean something like actual chemistry of the material, well, that's true. I mean, that's another nice thing about what's going on with health product declarations. For example, we are now really trying to grapple with human health concerns and hazardous materials that affect people and being able to be transparent about those.
Okay, next question. We do have quite a few coming in, so maybe be brief. Let's see. Thank you for the presentation. Did you notice some, and I think this might be a future tense question, did you notice some specifics in the reused doors and windows? Are they mostly in wood or some composite materials? So I think we're talking about materials that we haven't worked on yet because we are just launching the grant program.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you asking what we're going to focus on or what the products are that are being sold that are reclaimed?
Maria, you can take yourself off mute. Looks like there's a both comment. I think a lot of it too is like,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm because I'm doing research on reuse, quite a wide one, because I'm analyzing existing reuse marketplaces across Europe, but also I'm tackling partly US. So, and my question, if you in your like practice and experience noticed some specifics, for instance, for openings, because in Europe mostly are reused exactly like door and windows from wood and some timber mixes, and very often they go not for use but more like repurpose. And so yeah, that's my question, if you have some insights regarding it. Thank you very much.
Um, well, so those are, I will add cabinets as well because those are three categories where you can have a wide range of materials in those product categories. Um, as far as creating the EPDs, so they would have to be categorized similarly. So wood windows are wood products, and wood windows are wood products. And as well, then you have aluminum window or steel window. There's a lot of cabinetry that's made from MDF and others. I mean, a lot of countertop materials that are different, but um, historically, I mean, the older materials are mostly solid lumber. And then, like anything, you can start having different variations. And I would just say the point is we do have to abide by the material ingredients in each category. But wood cabinetry, solid wood or solid wood door is a clear category for us and a lot of products.
Thank you.
there's continued chat about steel specifically, and not necessarily questions, but that some of the steel is from reconditioned or decommissioned oil rigs and so on. So some good
Yes.
chat very specifically.
Hello, Thornton, and he knows I'm very familiar with this. And it's also true in the United States.
Yeah.
I have been collecting reclaim, reuse steel companies and what they list for sale. And in fact, yes, a lot of even in the US as well, it's not a used stock. It is simply a surplus stock, a canceled order. And I have noticed a little bit of confusion that, well, I won't call it confusion, but grouping of both surplus and actually deconstructed steel together. So we cannot do that. Those are two different things.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Next question. I think we still have a few more. I'm Sue, a PhD student working with Dr. Chris Rausch at UT Austin. Thank you for this fantastic presentation. What would be possible economic benefits to commercial construction materials and manufacturers of producing EPDs for reclaimed materials?
the benefit of a new product manufacturer to produce an EPD for a reclaimed product.
No, I think it's the opposite. What is the benefits of having EPDs for reclaimed products?
To
For
sell
commercial
more, to sell more of them, to sell more products.
So the question is focused, I think, on commercial construction material manufacturers. What would be the
Maybe
possible
we could
benefits for
maybe we could unmute because a company that makes a new product is not making a EPD for a reclaimed product. They're making it for their own product. What do you mean exactly? Between a commercial manufacturer.
Yeah, I think the point is that we're trying to highlight the fact that reuse is got a better economic benefit, a climate impact benefit, and kind of showcasing how there is a difference between new construction materials and those that have been reclaimed for reuse. So I think it's more of a comparison versus a supporting an existing new system.
Okay, so
I'm interpreting here and making sure that we get to all the other questions we still have, which is still a
well,
few.
let me just say, I think there's huge benefit when you can model beyond modules A1 through 5. Because what we need, of course, is products that can be reused in the future. And so a huge benefit for any producer is to consider the availability and utility of being able to reuse their material after oftentimes not literally a technical service life, however, more of a, I'll call it cultural or economic life. So perfectly good stuff that has more life to it should be or can be a goal for any manufacturer.
I would agree. That's actually a really good point. So it does highlight the good work that's already in that new material that can be reused another time. And kind of anticipated this question. How confident are we that the EPA funding will be available for the duration of the project timeline? And is there a plan B if the funding doesn't materialize? And when you say we, who are the primary collaborators?
Well, we as collectively Build Reuse, we are working with the Forest Products Lab, which is part of the USDA, because of the large emphasis on reclaimed lumber, and they have a long history of, and they are kind of R&D of the federal government on reclaimed lumber and LCA of reclaimed lumber and LCA and mass timber and all these really important aspects of lumber use. I'm very confident.
Great.
And I'll jump to the one from Alex, which is, so Alex, it would possibly, and I showed a slide, transport is part of a deconstruction process, however, not of the actual reuse facility. That's not typically in an LCA for normal, sort of a traditional LCA EPD of a new product. And then accompanying process another product. No, so that's what what I just said. So commuting to the reclaim Seattle reclaim warehouse, I think whatever it's called, would not be an energy input to the process. And actually, the building itself would not be an input because it's not directly associated with production. What we count is actual direct input to the production of the material. So all the equipment to, say, in the case of a resaw mill and milling, it would be all that equipment doing the resaw, the milling, moving products around and things like that. It's all apples to apples. You're not, okay, so I said enough.
There's a great comment where the city of Portland will be benefiting from this related to deconstruction and reuse of wood. So that's a great comment that a lot of folks liked. Okay, next question. We're getting down to the wire for just a couple more left.
I agree with Lauren.
Yes.
And it gives me an opportunity to say there are variabilities. However, when we think about the upstream of the raw material extraction, and we have global supply chains for almost everything nowadays, and actually people just aren't even really accounting for that. because these things have already been made, those burdens have already been, quote, consumed in the first life. So we have a much shorter supply chain, literally, which is that whole building, for example. And starting from that point, not, another country. And so there are, again, complexities and variabilities, but the system boundaries are also different. Yes.
Another question that came in is, do you know of any country that has implemented advantageous public policies in terms of taxes to use reused materials? And I can say that counties, parts of the state of Minnesota, are offering deconstruction funding, so grant opportunities, kind of the opposite of taxes, to use used building materials. So in Minnesota, our largest county, Hennepin County, where the city of Minneapolis is, offers funding for using used building materials. And I would love to inspire other localities or entire countries to do that. Larry asks, I'm collaborating with Steve Gilchrist at the UK and Alexis Feitel of KLNA, who I know is on this call and asked some really great questions. That just giving it a thumbs up for support. The chat moves around, new questions or comments are added, so then the questions go away. Brad, are you aware of testing to validate recovered lumber for structural use? That could be a whole
I know. So Alex from the UK, I actually was on the structural lumber reuse webinar for 5 hours, which started at 3 o'clock in the morning, my time, a couple of weeks ago, and was having exchanges with Dan on the chat. So there is a lot of great work in Europe. There was a whole group of people in that. And so we were talking about all kind of nitty-gritty things like moisture content and change of properties of lumber over time. My favorite current policy is the state of New Jersey, which has a tax incentive for companies who produce EPDs, and also public procurement policy for a bid credit. So they'll actually give you, for example, 5% bid credit, or you could call it debit. They'll take it off the top of your bid for providing products with EPDs. So those are direct financial incentives to be able to provide EPD products. The quantity, quality. Yes, it's a thing. Oh boy, we're going to run out of time. But anyway, yeah, it's a thing. Quality and warranties. So warranties are not common, as is. However, back to lumber, there are, and we just sat in on a webinar from, and I'm sorry to blank on her name, from the city of Eugene, Oregon. And they're working on structural lumber in the International Building Code. And Oregon and state of Washington both have a default lumber grade for lumber within those areas, within those states for residential use. You can regrade lumber. So I've actually done visual grading, which is the traditional method of any kind of grading on reclaimed lumber, actually with Forest Products Lab. You can do structural, you can do destructive testing. There are now methods of sort of x-rays and CAT scans. That's a little intense, but you could actually run a piece of lumber through a CAT scan and look at the density of the lumber.
I think actually that's the last question. I did put into chat that, we'll wrap this up pretty quickly, but that people can email you directly. So I put that email address in chat. I believe that there's going to be an updated presentation at the Build Reuse conference. So another reason for you to join us August 4th through 6th in St. Paul, Minnesota for the Build Reuse conference. But this is the first of several other webinars that we'll be hosting on this topic. So this is a great place to start.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone.
Brad, thank you on behalf of Build Reuse, and you too, because you are Build Reuse. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Take care, everybody.